It's discussion on capital naturally leads me to financial markets, financial system. D2, there are two roles at a macroeconomic level. There are two roles that the financial system plays. One, the financial system is the clearinghouse for capital. The flows for capital from people who save capital to the people who need capital, those flows are managed through the financial system. And their ability to continue to provide that flow, either as equity or debt, is very, very important. The second, which at least for a lot of us, what Ananta refers to as the millennials and Generation Z learned it the hard way, is the financial system could be the biggest source of risk for the economy. So not only do we need support from the financial system, we also need resilience of the financial system to a lot of these changes that's happening around. From a risk manager's perspective, what would you tell, how would you kind of educate the person to look at this complex thing called financial system and say, how do you factorize it and analyze it to say, this is where you should look for support and these are the signs of resilience?
Sure. So before I start, I think it's very difficult to argue against a top economist and a perennial optimist, really. Yeah. And both of them already have covered a lot of ground, really. So I won't go on what I thought I'd cover, really, but I'd probably touch on a few points which I think are important in our conversation over here. And maybe I'd probably complete earlier than 10 minutes, so we'll hand it over back to you for you to ask questions faster. I think the first statement I'd like to make, and this is again back to what Ananta said, beware, there is bad weather ahead. Yeah. Navigate cautiously. Yeah, a banker by nature is conservative. So I think a lot of that conservatism comes in the way we act, we behave. But if I were to look around, I sort of am pretty much in sync with what Nags said. It is not looking good out there. And let me take you back about 16, 17 weeks to mid-March. That was the start of the problem in India. We were just about looking at, maybe 50 to 100 cases every day. And we'd say, oh, we are behind New York by about, 2.5 to 3 weeks. And we probably will peak out at maybe about 1,000 odd cases incrementally every day. And that got us horribly frightened at that point of time. And this is, close to about 17 weeks back. And here we are today, 23,000 incremental cases, close to 8.5 lakh total cases. And we don't seem to be worried. I think it really scares one. And when you are in financial services, I think the one word which you have to be worried about really is mortality. Yeah. And when I look back the last 20 years, of course, I don't have too much of experience outside the country, but within the country. When I look back, late 90s, 97, 98, India, SME credit crisis. At that point of time, it was fashionable for corporates to run an NBFC. Yeah, you name the corporate and they would have an associate company as an NBFC. And there were close to 4,000 of them. And by end of 2000, you only had 50 of those 4,000. 3,950 of them died. Yeah, and that's the brutality of financial markets. You talk of, both Navneet as well as Anand talked about the GFC crisis. I don't want to be an institution like a Bear Stearns. I don't want to be American Insurance. I'm scared shit about mortality. And I think it's extremely important from a financial services point of view, because it is, in my mind, one of the riskiest business out there in the marketplace. Yeah. You have all the bad reasons why that business should be run. You have high fixed costs, you have high leverage, and you have risk which can be absolutely unknown. I call credit risk as a 2% upside and 100% downside risk. If I take the credit, I can hope to earn only 2%. If I lose, then I lose 100%. And I can be bankrupt in no time. And hence, a lot of the conservatism needs to be built into a financial services. Well, and that's when when you look out in the marketplace and say, hey, what is happening over here? Yeah, this is not something which is good. And the big problem really is there is no predictability. I cannot say whether I am 3 months away from a solution or 1 year away from a solution. Back to in March, we were basically thinking of 3 scenarios. A short-term scenario, that means this disease lasts for 4 to 6 weeks and then it's out of the way, and it's a short-term problem, we'll be out of this and back to normal business. Or a slightly medium one, which was a 3 to 6 month problem, which takes maybe another 6 months to come back to normal. Or a third scenario, which was a longer scenario, which was sort of a 6 to 12 month scenario, where the coming back to normal would have been a more elongated process. And back then, all of us thought that we would be somewhere in the second scenario, yeah, which is really, a 2 to 3, 4 month scenario. Hence, recovery will happen in 3 to 6 months' time. Today, I'm not sure whether it is even scenario 3. I don't know. And I have no information to help me say whether I'm closer to scenario 3 or closer to scenario 4, 5, or 6. But as a financial institution, I have to protect. Yeah, I have to protect. And like I said in that statement with Navneet, at the end of the day, you are out in the ocean, yeah, and there is a lot of turbulence. There are a lot of ships out there, yeah. Since there is so much turbulence, very unlikely all of them will reach the shore. I have to have my risk management in place to ensure that I am one of those who reaches that shore, and hence capitalizes on the opportunity out there, really. So that's one part of the whole piece. I think when you look at it from a government point of view for a long period of time, I think the choice was whether you save lives or you save livelihood. And I think the government stance initially was a lot more on saving lives rather than worrying about livelihoods. I think the livelihood part, they got into the act much later when they saw that, the movement upwards is, more than what everyone was expecting. And probably the lockdown was not necessarily really helping. But any livelihood related, benefit which the government, wants to plan necessarily, like you said, has to run through financial intermediation. The dilemma with the financial intermediary always is who takes the risk? And we're talking about risk management. Who takes the risk? Do I take the risk or does the government take the risk? Because the risk is unknown. This is not about 1% credit loss or 2% credit loss. I have no idea what the credit loss is going to be. So if I have to factor my risk-taking ability Then you look around in the marketplace, you're talking of financial systems which are saddled with high costs, all of them really, or they're saddled high cost of credit already, or they're working on very thin equity capital. So there is no capacity in the financial intermediation today to take undue more risk. You're already troubled with risk which you've already taken on. How do you take on more risk at this point of time? And hence, the government's entire program on guarantees, what sort of God sent, because what it does really is it protects the intermediary from that delta risk which you normally would have otherwise not taken. The issue really is it is too limited. It is only focused at MSME. Yes, MSME does require a lot of benefit. It is badly badgered, but practically the entire economy is decimated. Yes, you mentioned about some sectors of agri probably which are not so much in trouble, but that's only relative. But rest of the economy, which is 75-80% of the economy, is badgered. You don't save an economy through a financial intermediary by helping 15% of the total economy, which is really the MSME. So if the financial intermediary has to take that risk on, and you have to benefit the economy, that support must be available for the entire economy rather than select segments of the economy. And like Navneet also touched upon, the last 3 years we basically survived on consumption and government expenditure. Consumption got badgered last year. So if you have to get consumption back, at least the consuming segment you have to support. You have to find means of support. The financial intermediary cannot take that risk on. It has to come from elsewhere. And in a strange way, the guarantee mechanism is an interesting mechanism because, mind you, there is no shortage of liquidity. There is as much liquidity you want. There is unwillingness to dabble with that liquidity, and the guarantee really helps in directing that liquidity where it should be. So the liquidity is there. The guarantee helps the government because yes, you have a pretty stressed financial flexibility at the center. The guarantee is pushing that flexibility to some extent without stressing the current fisc. So to that extent, it is sort of a pretty easy win-win for everyone. And I just wish they do a lot more of that. But it also gets into trouble by, what I call the regulatory positions. Say, for example, will we see moratorium 1 getting extended to moratorium 2? Because as financial intermediaries, we have to be worried about that aspect because that's something which impacts us directly. Will moratorium 2 become moratorium 3? Will we talk of restructuring 1 and then will we have restructuring 2? So where does it end? And all these are risks which, when you look ahead, are all apparent and possible. And all of them will happen and can happen until you are clear that the disease has peaked out and is on the way down. And then you don't really know whether there is a stage 2 of this disease and a stage 3 or a round 2 and a round 3 of these disease. So it's a pretty, paranoid situation out there. And yes, capital markets seem to have moved ahead. Capital markets seem to have discounted maybe this fisc entirely, but that's reality. And I'd urge a very significant portion of risk management is to protect the balance sheet. So if you can raise equity, please do it. The capital markets are discounting this year. The capital markets are where they are. Yes, they may not be in sync with the real markets, but the reality is they are there. So use that opportunity to mitigate risks while you are focusing on your cutting costs and your deleveraging. So yes, that is all there. And until all of this is on, we just keep praying that God sends us vaccine sooner than later, and we have a medicine sooner than later, really. But it is unknown, really. Yeah, and that's the big piece. You see, the past crises have largely been economic crises triggered primarily by the financial sector. Yeah, so credit leading to, economy. This time, credit is not the independent variable. The independent variable is coming from health. And, financial experts, economists, all of us have no idea about health or where it is leading. And that's the uncertainty which is very difficult to battle. Yeah, that's my spiel.